That sounds promising. So, as I was saying, for today's session, we will be talking about revenge pornography. What are the laws on this and what does it include? And I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Phoebe Czachur. Phoebe's career highlights range from being a research assistant in the Department of Psychiatry at Oxford University to investigating serious and complex crimes as a detective in Thames Valley Police, and most recently working as a safeguarding officer in the further education sector. So thank you so much for joining us today, Phoebe. I'm going to be asking Phoebe some questions, but if anything comes up throughout that you want to ask, feel free to pop any questions in the chat box and we will come back to them later, as Dot said, once the recording has been finished. So no worries about that. So Phoebe, my first question for you today is, will I get in trouble if I tell the police I sent intimate photographs of myself to somebody and I am under 18?
Hello, delighted to be here. So yes, first question, I think importantly to point out the fact that if you're under 18 and there's a photograph of yourself that's an intimate photo, technically by law that would be an indecent image of a child and therefore illegal to make, possess or distribute. So that's taking it, sending it to a friend, etc. So that's the technical law side of it. However, importantly, the police do say that young people engaging in sexting are very unlikely to be prosecuted. So the law is there to protect young people and children. And essentially, if a photograph is shared between young people of a similar age and they're within a healthy relationship and it's consensual sharing of a photograph, then it's not normally going to be subject to any formal prosecution. So that's something that in 2016 they did put into place something called Outcome 21, which is what allows police officers to use that discretion and not, enact a formal prosecution for sharing of photographs. However, if there was anything to do with it that was, a risk or a safeguarding concern, then obviously at that point the police would be looking to safeguard that young person and look into it further. But simply sharing between young people in a way that's consensual, you're not going to get in trouble for telling the police that you've done that, and you shouldn't, let that prevent you from talking to the police about something that's happened subsequently, just because you fear that that may be illegal itself.
Great, thank you. And I suppose that brings on to the point about age and safeguarding. Could you share intimate photographs with your partner if they are under 18 and I'm over 18? So partner was, 17 and 18 or 16 and 18.
So yeah, when we talk about children by law, we're talking about anyone under 18, which I know in different circumstances, different organisations will determine children as a different age, but by law we're talking about 18 and under. So if you are 18 or over and you've got a partner who is under 18, technically by law, if you were to share a photograph with them, it would be classed as sharing, an indecent image with a child or a minor. So if that came to the police attention, it would be similar to what I've just discussed in that they would consider all the circumstances. So if you're in a partnership of similar age, it's healthy and it's consensual, the police would use that discretion. And obviously, if there's no safeguarding need there, then it wouldn't be prosecuted against. However, obviously, if it came to police attention and they thought that actually in this circumstance there was an element of risk there, or there was, some coercion, or it was not wanted by the recipient, then obviously at that point they would look at it a bit differently, and it might require a conviction or prosecution. But generally speaking, things that are consensual, healthy, and of people of similar age, the police are able to use that ability not to prosecute.
Right, so it seems like, safeguarding rather than technicalities are the biggest issue. And so those sort of laws and regulations, I guess, relate to the general sharing of intimate images with young people, but I think the revenge porn aspect comes in when those images are shared further. So leading on from that, the next question I have is it okay to show just my close friends intimate images of my partner? And what if I'm just showing them out of admiration?
So I think the first thing I would say on that point is, from a moral perspective, just away from the law for a second, it's important that you do consider, obviously, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. maybe sharing it out of affection, also considering, is that something that you would want if you hadn't consented yourself? Do you feel they would consent if you were to ask them? And I think looking at it that way, young people should be aware that they shouldn't take that choice out of someone else's hands. And it's really important that we have those discussions openly. But when we move on to the law aspect of it, the revenge pornography law does state that there is a defence in terms of, obviously you use the word admiration there, if you were to share a photograph of somebody else and you were not doing it to cause them distress, at that point there's a not complete offence. So there is currently in the revenge pornography law a requirement that intent to cause distress is part of the offence. So it's not complete without that. And it's not enough just to assume that distress would be a natural consequence of that. So it's an element of the law that is highly debated at the moment. I think it's fair to say that in lots of quite famous cases that have been happening in the news, there's lots of people debating the fact that line, the element of needing intent to cause distress, should be looked at and should be altered. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as just taking it out, because it has other implications if you don't include that element in there. But at the moment, as it stands, sharing a photograph in terms of revenge pornography does require an intent to cause distress to the person who is depicted in those images. So if you were sharing it out of admiration, or if you were sharing it as a joke, unfortunately, that wouldn't be a complete offence of revenge pornography. But I do think it's really important to say that the revenge pornography law is quite recent in terms of law in the UK. So there are lots of other offences that might be appropriate if the revenge pornography law is not met. So it's not to say that just because there was no intention there and it can't be proved, that nothing would happen. Obviously, if somebody's under 18 when the photos were made, then that instantly is an offence for indecent images of children, and that would be prosecuted without any need to show distress element on behalf of the defendant. And then also things such as if the recipient of the photograph or the imagery, if they didn't want that, then that would be potentially an offence of harassment or malicious communications. And then there's other offences such as things under the Computer Misuse Act. So if somebody's got that photograph by going onto one of your devices, that's potentially an offence of hacking. So there's lots of different offences that might actually capture what has happened to someone, and it might not particularly be the exact revenge pornography law due to that intent of distress being needed. But that's not to say there's not a range of other offences like harassment or malicious communications that might actually capture what's happened. So I hope that makes sense.
Definitely. So yeah, to be on the safe side, I would say, yeah, don't share intimate images of your partner with anyone. Yeah, I think there's a bit of talk, if I'm not wrong, about closing that loophole of the intent to cause distress. So hopefully that will come in soon. So obviously you've got experience in policing and a lot of legal knowledge, which is fantastic. So what does it mean when the police refer to the public interest test in cases of revenge pornography?
Yeah, so when the police decide to prosecute, there's a decision based on two tests. One of those is the evidential test, and that basically looks at what evidence there is and if there's enough evidence for a reasonable prospect of a conviction. And then the second part of that test is the public interest test. And that essentially decides whether it's in the public interest to prosecute for that offence. So it takes into account transparency, things that the public would want to be prosecuted, and things that are of public importance. So, for example, it'd be a good example would be it's not in the public interest to prosecute sexting between two under 18s of similar age in a healthy consenting relationship, because if there's no element of safeguarding there and it's a healthy relationship and it's consensual, it wouldn't be in the public interest to prosecute one of those young people and take them through the court process. So it's very much, again, based on that idea of slightly discretion in a way, but the use of the police not needing to, criminalise people where it's not appropriate.
Definitely, thank you. And so we touched briefly on this in a previous answer, but I think it's quite good one to come back to. So what does the new revenge porn legislation mean in simple terms?
Yeah, so as I said, the revenge pornography law is actually quite it's relatively new compared to lots of laws we have in the UK. So it comes under Section 33 of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015, and it involves any disclosure of private sexual materials, either photos, films of another person without their consent, and it's with the purpose of causing distress to the person depicted. So as we've just discussed, obviously that last part is something that can be a hurdle for some people getting a conviction for this offence. And when we look at laws, if there's the particular wording of the offence, every element of that needs to be completed in order for the offence to be complete. So it's not just one part that needs to be there. However, it's really important to say as well that in 2021, there was an amendment to add on an offence for threatening to disclose. So previously, that wouldn't have come under part of the revenge pornography. It might have been a different offence. But now it's an offence to simply, especially with young people, I think it's really important to know that if you were to send a text message to maybe an ex-partner or someone and say, I'm going to share these photos of you, that in itself is actually an offence of threatening to disclose photos. So that's really important. It came in as part of the Domestic Abuse Act because it shows an element of control and kind of manipulation. So it's really important that people are aware that if they've been put in a position where they've received even a threat for those photographs or videos to be released, then they do, that they are a victim of an offence even at that point. And there's absolutely things the police can do to support them. But on that subject as well, there is an organisation, it's called the Spite Project, which is run by Queen Mary University London, which stands for Sharing and Publishing Images to Embarrass. And this is a really good project that assists victims of any intimate image abuse by providing free and specialist legal advice to any resident in England and Wales. So they're a really good project to use if you're not quite sure whether what offence your circumstances may meet. As I said, there's lots of different offences. It might not necessarily just be the revenge pornography one that it falls under, but they will be able to provide that specialist legal advice to victims and advise them on what evidence they do have and what offence it might fall under. So yeah, I think legislation can sometimes be quite hard to get your head around, but there is lots of, this legislation itself is a huge milestone, I think. And I think once that element of intent to cause distress is maybe amended, which I think it likely will be in the coming years, I think then it would go even further to protecting young people and adults as well.
Yeah, it sounds like there's quite a lot of support available in the law, and obviously you touched on Spite as well. Is there any other support that people can access anonymously for revenge pornography that you know of other than Spite?
Yeah, so I think there's loads of organisations out there. Not all of them will be specific for revenge porn. There are a few. So, for example, the Revenge Porn Helpline, which is a UK-based support agency, that is just for people over 18, which is only because they're not equipped to deal with any instances of images of children being shared. So that's why they only help people over 18. But then there's things such as Childline, and they have a report remove tool. So if you're aware of any images of anyone under 18 being shared online, whether that's one of your friends, whether that's images of yourself, you can simply anonymously go onto that tool and report where that image has been shared and provide some details so that they can have it taken down. And then in terms of more general support for young people, there's organisations such as the Mix, which will support people under 25, and Young Minds for under 18s, as well as a host of local organisations that will be able to help and support you through what effects may have lasted after being victim to a crime such as this, but also they'll have specialist knowledge on the topic as well.
Great, thank you so much. I just saw that Kate has put the link into Spite in the chat. So if anybody was looking for that, it's in there. So that is all of the questions that I had. So I'm going to ask Dot to stop the recording now.